skies will be filled with the greatest air armada the world has ever seen. Our own Army Air Forces, the best planes ever built, 65,000 planes this year. And by the time you finish your training, America will have overwhelming superiority in the air.
Well, thanks for coming out and sharing your Saturday morning with us. And I'd like to share with you some stories of some of our greatest generation, some of the amazing folks that served. And this story is about Neel Kirby, who commanded the 348. And a little bit about me. I spent 37 years in the Air Force, 8 years overseas, 2 wars. I love fighters. I got to be the chief of aerospace medicine at the largest fighter training base in the free world, F-15s, F-16s, and later on in reconnaissance F-4s. And so I got to meet a lot of really amazing folks. I've been to 6 of the Doolittle Raider reunions, got to know those guys. And so I was a chief flight surgeon, but I also was trained as a military head and neck surgeon. And my last job was working for the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. So do you know how to tell when your date with a fighter pilot is half over? Enough about me. Let me tell you about my jet. All right. So I have an incredible fount of knowledge that I'm going to share with you. So all right. So I love this quote by David Lloyd George, even though it's from 1917. He talks about our fighter pilots and how the heavens are their battlefield. They're the cavalry of the clouds, high above the squalor and mud, so high in the firmament that they're not even visible. They fight the eternal issues of right and wrong. So Neel Kirby was the personification of the perfect combat leader. Although he was short and slight, he was a giant among fighter pilots, according to General Kenney. He grew up in Wichita Falls, Texas. His dad was a dentist, Dr. John Gallatin. Went to school in Arlington, went to University of Texas, and joined the Army Air Corps in 1937. While training in San Antonio, he met his future wife, Virginia King Cochran, and they ended up having 3 sons. The first assignment was up in Selfridge. He was part of a pursuit group. That was in 1940. He later got assigned to the Canal Zone, and that's where he was during the attack on Pearl Harbor. And unfortunately, he had to stay there until 42. He did get promoted to captain, but eventually he was selected to be the fighter group commander and was assigned to Westover Field in Massachusetts in 1942. Now, they thought that they were going to go to Europe, and so that's what they were prepping for, and had high expectations to join the fight against the Germans. But politics being as it is, General Kenney kept complaining that the Pacific was the stepchild. You guys aren't sending us any aircraft. I want P-38s. I want P-38s. And so the chief of staff said, well, I can give you P-47s because nobody wants them. And so he ends up getting reassigned. So they end up being posted to Australia in 1943. By that time, he's promoted to lieutenant colonel. And these are some of the planes being shipped across. And when he shows up, the first thing he does when he talks to General Kenney, who's got the record for the most aircraft shot down? I want to know what that is. And then, because the P-47 has a reputation of being a pig, he picks a fight with a P-38. He wants the top pilot of the P-38s to dogfight with. And they go up and mix it up, and Kirby is able to get him in his gun sights at least 3 different times. So he establishes the reputation of the Jug as being maybe okay for combat. Now, the Thunderbolt was built obviously for Europe to escort the high-altitude bombers, but the maneuverability was sacrificed for their firepower, their armor plating, and the huge engine. and it was very slow to take off. It took a while to get to altitude, and you didn't want to get in a fight at low altitude in a P-47. And many of the pilots joke that if the Army engineers built a runway that would go around the world, Republic would build an airplane that required that entire runway. So this is the inside of what a P-47D model looks like. This is from the National Museum of the Air Force. This is a reproduction of Neel Kirby's airplane there. And it came in two flavors. So there was the P-47 with the Razorback. They used to call this the bird cage. And then later on, they designed the bubble top, and which provided obviously much greater visibility. And so you see our bubble top over here and our Razorback back over there. But when they put the bubble top on it, it changed the aerodynamic characteristics of the airplane. And so in high-speed dives, they ended up having to put a fin onto the rudder in order to provide additional stability. So originally, Republic was called Sovetski, and this was the largest single-engine fighter in World War II. 10,000 pounds empty, 17,000 loaded. Count them, 850 caliber machine guns, and could carry 10 5-inch rockets, 1,500 pounds of bombs. The R-28 engine, R-2800 engine, was the largest fighter engine in World War II. Speeds up to 433, cruising speeds of 260. Required auxiliary tanks to get 1,100 miles, could go up to 42,000 feet, and was about 40 inches wide, 36 inches long. So what did they cost? Back in 1945 dollars, it was about 84,000. Today, that'd be about 1.5 million. 15,000 of these were built, but only about 4 are left flying today. And hopefully, our Razorback will be the 5th. So again, some of the sizes. Comparing against the Zero, all right, so this is engine horsepower. It has about twice the horsepower. Weight, it weighs at least 3 times. Max speed, well, it was a little faster. But again, the Zero could outturn us. And so you didn't want to get in a turning fight with a Zero. Now here's a guy that figured out that this is a big airplane. When they showed up in Australia, the Australians said, well, where do the other crew members sit? It was so big. So this is a cutaway of the R-2800. We have one on display here in the museum that you can look up closer. Early on, they had a few problems with this. Occasionally, they would spit spark plugs, and oil would come out, and unfortunately coat your windshield, making it a little difficult to sometimes get the airplane back. And additionally, the ignition system would interfere with your radio when you transmitted. So they had to do some shielding there in order to make that. But later on, it was a very reliable engine. And you notice it's not liquid cooled, it's air cooled. And that made it more combat resilient. You could shoot out 3 of those cylinders and still get back home. And so compared to the P-51, if you got your cooling system knocked out, you're going down. That airplane, that engine is going to seize on you. And so this made it a much more survivable aircraft. And this is a picture of our display and over there in Hangar 3, but this is the turbo supercharger. And you can see how much real estate this thing takes up. That's a lot of territory. Now, Kelly Johnson, who designed the P-38, he saw how big the P-47 was, and he says, I think there's a better way that we can do that. We don't need to take up all that real estate. And so he designed a way to super turbocharge his P-38s without doing something as enormous as Republic did. So the beauty of this P-47 is its ability to dive. There was nobody who could catch you in a dive. It fell out of the sky like a meteor. And you could recover and zoom and convert that energy. And so the P-47 guys would love to hang out 22,000 feet or higher, looking for prey and then dive down at incredible speeds, swoop through the formation, shoot as many guys as you could, and zoom back up and come back again. Don't stay down there, just go in and hit. So some of the other fighter aircraft, like the P-38, had problems with compressibility, which is where your leverage in the airplane, because the compressibility of the air, moves the fulcrum and causes you to have a tuck, and you could potentially lose control. P-47 didn't do that, and it was much easier to handle in those parts of the envelope. So carried a lot of stuff, carried rockets, carried bombs, lots of protection, armor plating, and big machine guns. And you see the troops loading. Those strips were 9 yards long. And so many times the pilot would say, give me the whole 9 yards, okay? So could carry 3,400 rounds of 50 cal. That's 13 pounds of lead that it would spit out a second. This is what a 50 cal shell looks like. All right? One of these could ruin your day, okay? 13 pounds of this would definitely vaporize you. And so, by the way, we have these for sale in the gift shop. And so here's a picture of the armor plating. Look at how thick this glass is on the front plate. Now, they don't call it bulletproof. They call it bullet resistant. And so I'm sure if you took a face shot from a cannon, it probably wouldn't work. But to give you an idea of the combat resiliency of the P-47, this poor pilot had a 500-pound bomb that was stuck that he couldn't release from his fuselage. And when he crash landed, the bomb broke away and it blew up. And it blew the tail of his airplane off, blew off a good portion of his wings. But that armor plating, he was able to walk away from that particular crash. And so Republic built a solid airplane. And you look at these wing spars, they're still intact. And so he was a lucky guy. The other thing that they had was self-sealing tanks. And that added some weight. It also cut down on your fuel range. But at the end of the day, it got you home. And so it had multiple layers, and that rubber layer, when it came in contact with gasoline, would swell and seal off the hole. So you weren't streaming gas down the side of your airplane and igniting that and causing problems. This guy, he has a, I did something terrible. There we go. Has the, oh, I don't want to do that. All right. So he took an anti-aircraft shell through his propeller and still got home. And so, again, gives you some idea of the combat survivability. This guy hit a chimney on a low-level strafing mission, took off about half his wing, and still got back. And finally, this guy has an amazing story. So Major Johnson was flying his P-47, limping back after being in a dogfight. His turbocharger was knocked out, so he couldn't accelerate. And he was smoking, and he's trying to make it across the channel. And another FW-190 sees him and says, easy kill. Rolls in, starts emptying all his magazines on him. His guns, his cannon, and he still doesn't go down. And finally, the German pilot flies alongside him, looks over at him and goes. He gets back and he's counting the holes in his fuselage, and he stops after 200 holes in his fuselage, but 21 cannon holes in his fuselage, and he still got home. So, pretty amazing. It was a great airplane to ditch because it didn't have a scoop underneath it, and it actually had ridges underneath that made it a little bit easier to ride the waves. And so the P-47 pilots, they got a lot of trash talk at them, and they would just say, okay, if you want a cool picture to send back to your girlfriend, get a picture in front of a P-51. But if you want to get back to your girlfriend, fly a P-47. So, despite all those combat protections, there are pilots that still put it into the ground. And this is out of the manual. And so, because it sits kind of high, you got to be able to look as you're taxiing. You can collide with other aircraft. You can forget to put your landing gear down. You can run out of gas. You can get lost. And finally, step on the brakes too hard. So, but what Neel Kirby saw in the P-47 was a battle axe. This aircraft could attack with impunity, could withstand a 6-ton impact. And so with those 8 forward-firing 50 caliber guns, he figured out tactics to take advantage of that and use its natural ability. And as I mentioned earlier, the only reason General Kenney took him is because nobody else wanted him. So he's the commander of 348th Group. They had 3 squadrons initially, the 340th, 41st, and 42nd. Later on, they added the 460th Squadron, all flying P-47s, and these are typical formations that they would fly for basic combat, as well as for larger missions. This is a squadron box, and you notice they use different colors: red flight, white flight, blue flight, etc., so that you knew kind of who was where in the position. So Colonel Kirby had a number of P-47s. This is Fiery Ginger number 4. It's named after his wife, so I guess she was a hot redhead. And this is the area where they served. So you see Papua New Guinea up there and Australia. And this is where the Japanese were. And they're down in Port Moresby, so they would sortie out of that particular area. They used to joke that the weather was divided into 3 different things: rain, mud, and heat. And so, we sort of look at the pictures and attribute, these great glorious times and how cool it must have been. But in reality, this is what they were living in, okay? And, oh, by the way, there's malaria there. There's dengue, strongyloides, other kind of good parasites that can ruin your day. And so they're constantly dealing with just the environment that they're living in. If you were lucky, you got a wood floor on your tent, and so which made it a little more comfortable and a little bit drier. So these are some of the combat operations as they were beginning. Some of those are combined with the Navy, et cetera, in support. And you can see Port Moresby here. The Kokoda Trail that goes all the way to Boona is still there today, and many of the Australian military will hike it in honor of their seniors that went before them. And but you see the mountain, the Stanley Range, that goes up to 13,000 feet, and so it is quite the hike. So they joke that you start out with a full bag of luck and an empty bag of experience. And the key is to fill the bag of experience before you run out of luck. So Kirby begins his scoring in September of 1943. He shoots down a Mitsubishi bomber and a Nakajima, and shoots down a Recce airplane 10 days later. And in October of 1943, he flies an amazing mission. It's the mission in which he won the Medal of Honor. And he's just there with 3 other guys, the 4 of them. And they're going to jump 12 bombers and 36 fighters. Okay? Now, how many of you would be willing to jump into that kind of melee and 12-to-1 odds? Okay? So they joke that there are fighter pilots and there are pilots that flew fighters. Okay? The fighter pilots are fearless, and that was Kirby. And Kirby jumps in and begins to mix it up and ends up shooting 6 enemy airplanes down in that one mission. The combat lasts for almost an hour. Now, most air-to-air combat is done in minutes, okay? You get in, you know, maybe do 2 or 3 turns, and then you're either winning or losing. And so you either separate or you've knocked the other guy down. And his 2 other pilots, they knocked down 3 other aircraft. So they shoot down 9 aircraft in that whole melee, and they don't lose a single airplane. And this is actual footage from his gun camera. And of course, here he is. He got the Medal of Honor from General MacArthur. And he establishes the record for the most victories in a single mission. Of course, no record stands, and he becomes a national hero. 2 of the guys that he actually shot down were a group commander and a squadron commander and a wing commander. And you know, as you go back and you look at post-war records, the Japanese records are incomplete. So, you know, some of this information may or may not be true, et cetera. But the, you know, they sometimes will question whether those are actual legitimate kills. And the records for the most victories in a single mission was later set by a Navy Hellcat pilot, Dave Campbell. And then another Army pilot towards the end of the war, P-51 guy by the name of Bill Shomo, knocked down 7 airplanes, count it, in 6 minutes. Now that had to be a bunch of really poorly trained Japanese pilots, okay? But still counts. So, and of course, Major Bong was the other guy to compete with. He ends up finishing the war with 40 confirmed kills in a P-38. So after his Medal of Honor, he's promoted to a staff job. Yeah, that's what I want to do. So at that time, he has 12 victories, and but he still wants to be in the mix. And so whenever he can, he pencils himself onto the mission board, and you know, he's competing with Bong. Bong is racking up a score, but Bong is also assigned to a staff job training gunnery in P-38s, and they both want to break this guy's record. Okay, Rickenbach, 26 victories. That's the goal. We need to break that. Kirby wanted to be that man. So he finds an opportunity. He takes 2 of his best wingmen with him, goes out hunting for Japs. And he's flying his aircraft, Fire Age Injury 4. He's up at 22,000 feet, and he sees at 1,000 feet some Japanese bombers. And so, okay, you know, that's almost like 4 miles. And he decides to come sweeping down on those guys. However, those bomber guys weren't alone. They had some fighter escorts that he didn't quite notice. And so, as he dove in, one of those fighters came after him, and his buddy was able to shoot one of those guys, but there was a second guy that he couldn't get. And so Kirby's plane gets hit, and smoking, he sees him open the canopy and trying to bail out. And this is a painting done by Jim Laurier. So you see Kirby's plane in the front, his wingman passing him had shot down that particular fighter. But over here to the left, you can see the plane that got him. So to bail out of a P-47, there are a couple of ways you could do it. You could either roll the airplane inverted and fall out, or you put it into a slip and climb over the right side and hope you don't hit the tail. So Kirby was seen by the local people as having escaped by parachute, but he gets tangled in his trees and ends up dying from his bullet wounds. And the natives end up burying him, and his bones are not recovered for about 2 more years. There was a search team from the Royal Australian Air Force that found his wreckage, and eventually they identified his bones, and he's buried in North Dallas, Texas. And an article stating about him being found, and this is his gravesite. And there's a statue commemorating him in Arlington there at the Central Library. The National Museum of the Air Force has a reproduction of his airplane. And you see the tail, the fin off to the right. That's the actual tail from his airplane that you can see at the National Museum. Some great books out there if you're interested in learning more about the P-47 and Neel Kirby. A couple other books that I've come across, and some great websites. This particular website here on Neel Kirby is very well done. Not real long, but really tells his story nicely. And recently we had Greg visit our museum. His website is Greg's Airplanes and Autos, but he did a very detailed discussion on our P-47. And so better than any docent could do. So if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to go check that website out. And I'll close with this quote from Baron von Richthofen. It's all about dying in glory. A glorious death. Fight on and fly until the last drop of blood, the last drop of benzene, fuel, to the last beat of the heart, the last kick of the motor, a death for the night, a toast for his fellow friend and foe. So we'll close with Neel as the top P-47 ace in the Pacific, the only P-47 pilot to win the Medal of Honor, credited with 22 kills. And you see our P-47 Razorback over there. Someday it might look like this and slip the surly bonds. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you for your attention. Yes, sir. We have a microphone up here. He has a question.
So, AKA Neel Kirby wanted to be the Red Baron, like a different version.
Well, he wanted to be the top ace, like Rickenbacker.
Everybody?
Yeah.
Questions? Anybody?
Wow, I answered everybody's questions. Oh, we got one right here. There's one way in the back.
How did he die of his wounds?
See this? It stops working. He was shot in his airplane, but he had enough strength to get out, but he bled out, and that was all she wrote. And there wasn't a surgeon like me there to help him. Go ahead.
How many victories are necessary to be an ace?
5. Don't ask me who to determine that, but yes, sir.
I've always been curious about why they chose the P-51 in Korea instead of the Thunderbolt.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Because they got it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned earlier that the P-51 had the liquid cooled,
Right.
and 47 was air cooled, and that's why I thought it would have been the 47.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly for close, ground support type operations, P-47 proved itself. In the back.
Why did it take 2 years to recover his body?
Well, New Guinea is a big place, and there's a lot of bad stuff there. There's malaria and headhunters that eat people, and so it's not an easy place to explore. And so they get information from sources that say, hey, there might be a body over here, so now they got to go find it. And this is 40 years, 50 years after it happened, and the memory of some of those natives probably isn't as good as it used to be. And so, well, I thought it was over there, but maybe it was over here. So it takes a while. When they do these joint POW MIA search teams, sometimes they go explore and they don't find anything. So it takes a while.
We're still recovering the remains of people from World War II. So it takes a long time. You don't know where they are to find them.
Yeah, got a question right there. Use the microphone.
Can flight hours make you an ace?
No. Number of hours you have. Otherwise, all our airline pilots would be aces.
Oh, but they are, aren't they?
Yeah.
If the P-47 could dive so well, was it used as a dive bomber or just as a fighter?
So it had the ability to do dive bombing. So you could carry 500-pound bombs on it. And but You know, it was a dual role fighter, so it could do both.
Did you mention, Doc, that Razorback belonged to Kirby's group, the 348?
Well, I wasn't going to steal Bill's thunder, but what I will close with is if you enjoyed the talk today, please consider going on TripAdvisor. My name's Dave if you enjoyed it. It's Bill if you didn't. And so,
Okay, so before I hand this over to Alan, you guys got to turn your heads. We're going to look over at the Razorback here. Could you turn on that row lights? So this was a very unique find. For those that don't know, but back in the late 1990s, we went to New Guinea and we recovered quite a few aircraft out of Finchhaven, New Guinea. This being one of them. So the P-38 we have inside the museum, White 33 was the first one we built. We did Jandina 3, which was another P-38 for Paul Allen. And this is one that we have earmarked to do. We're not sure if we're going to do, after the SBD or SB2C, if we're going to do these Razorbacks, which we have 3, or if we're going to do the Hellcats. But this is kind of my choice to some degree. So if you look at the airplane, it's got some really unique features that people don't always know, but this right here dates it. It's kind of a time capsule, but you see this red stripe? Does anybody know what that is? What is it, young man? It's stars and bars, but why with the red stripe? It was only used for about 3 months in the Pacific theater of war. It was taken off. Anybody have a reason or an idea why? That's right. So the Japanese had a red meatball on the fuselage of the airplane. So the cool part about it is when you get up close to it, you will see there's a paint stripe right across here that's OD, that they took this out. The reason was we were shooting down our own people. So you're in a dogfight, and like Dave says, it's a matter of minutes. And you come up and you're pulling up from shooting at somebody, and you see red on the fuselage. You don't think about it, you shoot. And so what they found was we were shooting down our own people. So they made a technical order, or a TO, and said paint that out. So this is kind of cool because it gives the time frame of the history of the airplane. It was also a D2. The D2 was the first variant of the Thunderbolt in the Pacific in World War II. So where ours is a D40, that was the end of the D line, and then they went to an M, and then they went to an N. So the bubble canopy gave it better visibility and a lot of really cool things, but again, it had a problem with the tail. That's why they were extending the dorsal fin, because the Razorback here acted as a dorsal fin. The other neat part about it is right here, when this came out, there was etched with little red stripes, pieces over here. You can still see a few. This plane has 4 kills to it, which is really, really rare. So, this is why we've been wanting to build this airplane next. But again, you got to have enough lifespan to do it, right, Alan? So anyway, when you get done, you can walk around it, you can see it. It shows all of the turbo supercharger. For us as restorers, it's really kind of neat when you see something like this, because people always say, oh, it didn't have that, or it didn't have that. Historians like Dave would tell you a story. This is not a story, this is the real thing. So when you open it up and you start taking it apart, you can see stuff that was original. You can see stuff that was field modified. It's just a time capsule. So it's really kind of unique for us to have something like this here.
P-47s were very critical in the role during World War II. They were originally designed as a high-altitude fighter, and they found actually out that it did much better as a ground attack airplane. It has 850 caliber machine guns, and when you see the films of the trains blowing up, those are Thunderbolts that are doing that. So it really was designed for high altitude work, but it couldn't really maneuver with the enemy aircraft up there. They used them in both the European theater and the Pacific, and it was a really, like I say, a really brute of an airplane, and I'm going to get to fly this one today for the event. This particular airplane is a P-47D-40, which it was made in Evansville, Indiana, late in 1945. So it was didn't see any combat during World War II. Stayed in storage, did some stateside squadron assignments and things like that. Went into storage, and then in the late 50s, I believe, it went down to Peru as part of the military assistance program. And in the late 60s, a gentleman named Ed Jurist brought this one and 5 other ones and about 7 truckloads of spare parts back to the United States. It has been crashed twice in civilian hands, not by us. My partner Bill and I got it in about 1993, and it took us a couple of years to get it flying. It's since then it's got about 300 hours on it, and we used to be in Southern California and took it all over the West Coast for air shows and things. And now we're here at Colorado Springs, and you guys can come and see it and 28 other airplanes that we have that are flyable here at the museum. So thanks for coming out and watching the video, and hope you enjoy it.